the
4 areas the support structure. And then the B.
someone's reached the seats.
Somebody found the alpha.
Dear delegates, good afternoon. I invite you to take your seats. We will continue now our consideration of item 3, monitoring framework. When we broke for a lunch, we had completed the list of parties requesting for the floor. Please remember that list is closed. Now we will continue with interventions from observers. For the beginning, we have a list of 4 IPLC and major groups. Each of them can talk for 4 minutes. I will start with IPLC.
Dear co-chair and esteemed participants at SABSTA 26, I'm speaking on behalf of IIFB. We believe that strong partnerships between CBD parties and indigenous peoples and local communities is the bedrock for successful GBF implementation. We reaffirm our right to self-determination and to own, control, and manage our ancestral lands and territories, waters, and other resources. Our lands and territories are the core of our existence. They are linked to our survival and our knowledge systems, cultures, conservation, and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem management. We are the land, and the land is us. A new wave of land grabbing is now taking place, including for energy transition, mining, top-down conservation, digitization, and carbon markets. These threats must be urgently addressed, including through effective monitoring in partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities, upholding the principles of prior, and informed consent and data sharing agreements. We welcome the ATEG report on the monitoring framework, including incorporation of essential traditional knowledge indicators and the interlinkages made between the ATEG's work and that of the Working Group on Article 8J towards operationalizing the TK indicators. We also acknowledge the ATEG's work on taking into consideration Section C of the framework, pointing out that further work will be needed to fill the identified gaps. We recognize the work done to develop the metadata sheet on the indicator on land use change and land tenure in the indigenous and traditional territories of indigenous peoples and local communities, and the finding that this indicator meets the identified criteria for headline indicators. IFB has proposal for SABSTA 26/2 and SABSTA 26/2 add 1 as follows. In Annex 1, we propose 2 additions based on the technical and scientific review of the TK indicators. 1, adopt the indicator on land tenure and land use change in traditional territories of indigenous peoples and local communities as a headline indicator for target 22. 2, include the indicator participation in decision-making of indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the convention at all levels as a component indicator for target 3. In part 4 of SABSTA 26/2, recommendations to COP16, IIFB has text proposals in paragraph 1D(b)s to welcome the technical and scientific review of the TK indicators, 3(b)s to adopt the land use change and land tenure in the traditional territories of indigenous peoples and local communities as a headline indicator for target 22, 13 to add indigenous peoples and local communities, 15 to add community-based monitoring information system, 16(b)s SBI to review implementation of Section C of the GBF, 18 to add CBMIS, 19 to add local assessments, 22 to add on implementation of Section C in conjunction with the global review, 23 are to add on operationalization of Section C, 23B is the CBD Secretariat to identify options and potential collaborators to address gaps identified by ATEG, including development of the headline indicators 1.1 and 9.1. On the binary indicators, IIFB has text proposals on target 9 and 22, and in paragraph 3 in the annex to substar 25, recommendation 1. The text proposals are contained in our written submission to the Secretariat. We seek parties to support these proposals and access full monitoring framework. I do thank you.
Thank you, IFB. Now I wish to ask parties for support of, thank you, Australia. The next on my list is women. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Amelia Arreguin, and I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women's Caucus. The monitoring framework is a critical tool to enhance accountability and measure progress towards the achievement of the GBF. This requires that all agreed 23 targets be given the same importance and equally display a headline indicator, as binary indicators are only limited to measuring process rather than outcome, and this is not sufficient. In this context, the CBD Women's Caucus is urging parties to considering the following. Disaggregation by gender of relevant targets is crucial to monitor the gender-responsive implementation of the GBF. We urge parties to address existing limitations in methodologies, ensuring intersectional disaggregation to capture women's contributions and impacts on them. Immediate action is needed to address these gaps in national systems while maintaining openness for further improvements by COP17. Gender, age, and ethnicity status disaggregation are vital, particularly for targets 1, 2, 3, 10, 13, 16, 19, 21, 20, and 22, recognizing women's key roles and heightened vulnerability to biodiversity loss. Second, adopt a headline indicator for target 23. Otherwise, there is no way to track progress on women's contributions to biodiversity. Current asymmetries in methodology development hinder urgent policy action based on a human rights approach. Relevant SDGs indicators, for example, are already available as component and complementary and could be considered as alternative headline indicators for target 23. We request the reinclusion of an indicator on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. It was as a component indicator since COP15, and it holds significant complementarity for tracking progress on the target 23. With a draft methodology now open for review and trial, its inclusion offers a vital reporting tool for effective monitoring. We commend the ATEC for the work done on the monitoring framework and suggest that their mandate be extended to COP16 in order to complete methodological work for headline and binary indicators needed to fill the existing gaps, including those described in Annexes 2 and 3 and in document INF 19. For these 4 main points, we suggest the following additions to the decision text of Substat 26.2. Consistently add including indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth in paragraphs 4, 6, 13, 16, 17, and 19, as well as paragraph 23b, c, and d. Consistently add references to gender-responsive community-based and community-led monitoring systems in paragraphs 10, 13, and 15. To add a new paragraph that reads as follows: decides to extend the work of the ATEC to complete methodological work for headline and binary indicators needed to fill the existing gaps, including the gaps described in Annexes 2 and 3, and to inform of its progress to COP16 and present its results by 27 meeting of SOBSTA. In Annex 1, disaggregation by gender to be added in goals B, C, targets 1, 2, and 3, as well as 10, 13, 19, 20, and 21. Annex 1, disaggregation for target 23 should include ethnicity, sector, and ecosystem. And in Annex 1, to reinsert the Gender Plan of Action implementation indicator as a component 1. Lastly, the CBD Women's Caucus strongly recommends against removing any questions from Target 23 binary indicators that were discussed during Substat 25. All the components of the targets should be addressed. Specifically, we ask for retaining question 23.4 and 23.5 as they are essential enabling conditions to achieve Target 23. We seek parties' support for these proposals, and we also thank the African group, South Africa, Malawi, and Costa Rica for reassuring their commitment with women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Is there support from parties for this intervention? There is support? The next we will hear intervention from CBD Alliance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. A comprehensive, adequate monitoring framework is of utmost importance to ensure proper reporting of GBF implementation. We appreciate all the hard work done so far, but the current draft has severe flaws and gaps. The proposed indicators for targets 3, 10, 12, 15, 16 are fundamentally inadequate and will undermine the GBF. The target 3 and 12 indicators ignore all qualitative elements, and target 10 refers to certification systems that certify tree monocultures as if they were forest ecosystems and include no indicators on fisheries. Also, a component indicator for target 18.1 proposes to measure the monetary value of biodiversity offset as positive incentives for biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. But such biodiversity offsets have proven to be problematic for biodiversity protection and promote business as usual ecosystem destruction. We suggest its deletion. Meanwhile, the target 15 indicator refers to fundamentally flawed corporate-driven initiatives like the TNFD involving voluntarily reporting by investors on biodiversity risk that harm their own financial interest while neglecting to report on address negative impacts that harm biodiversity. While it is important to move forward and adopt the indicators proposed by the ATIC and expert groups on monitoring, it is equally important to fill the gaps to rectify the shortcomings mentioned above and identified by the ATIC on monitoring and come to a clear agreement on a process how to do this in a fair, inclusive, transparent, and clear process leading up to COP17. CBD Alliance have created a fact sheet, and I'm going to quote only 3 examples here. One, the fact sheet addresses the issues. 1, the indicator on target 3 neither tells us if the protected areas actually deliver conservation outcomes, nor does it let us know if human rights have been respected in the site designation and management process. 2, the proposed aggregated total applied toxicity methodology for headline indicator 7.2 is an appropriate and practical measure for the overall risk of pesticides to biodiversity and should be endorsed. Additionally, reinstating the target 7B complementary indicator on highly hazardous pesticides will help.
The speaker is speaking too fast. Please ask him to slow down for the interpreters.
Of target A7 of the global framework on chemicals. The indicator on plastic waste, however,
CBD Alliance, may you talk slower, please?
Sorry, Chair. The CBDA urges parties to adopt a headline indicator for target 23, developing an ambitious reporting methodology fully aligned with gender plan of action to monitor progress and ensure gender equality as well as gender responsive GBF implementation that provides all women, girls with equal opportunities and capacity to contribute to the convention objectives. Further examples are listed in Annex 3 to draft recommendation substar 26/2 and the CBDA fact sheet which is posted on our CBD Alliance website. There needs to be a comprehensive process to address these gaps and flaws by COP17. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. Is there party support for this intervention? I don't see any. The next on the list is youth. Youth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the statement made by the IFB and Women Caucus. We welcome with appreciation the work of ACTEC on indicators and other expert groups that contributed to the further development of the monitoring framework. We also appreciate the support for the selected GBIN youth experts to be part of this important discussion and contribute their technical expertise in issues that directly affect us as young people. We have said before that when our contributions are not being measured, they are not reported. And when they are not reported, we become invincible. We emphasize that suitable indicators and monitoring guidance on youth and intergenerational equity remains a clear gap in the monitoring framework, as also stated in Annex 3. The GYBN is carrying out a youth-led process to fill these gaps and invite support from others to ensure that this can be operational at the soonest possible time. We also support the proposal for process to receive contributions that fill the identified gaps by COP17. We gratefully acknowledge the important work done by the ACTEC in the providing guidance in the monitoring progress towards Section C, which crucially states the importance of gathering age-disaggregated data and guidance in monitoring inclusively and with a human right-based approach. We encourage parties to apply these practices as they continue the process of updating their NBSAPs and in crafting national reports. For this, we strongly call on parties to integrate youth indicators in their national monitoring frameworks. Finally, we call on parties to ensure that the binary indicators for Target 22 and its questions are as strong as possible, especially as it is currently the only mandatory target indicator for a number of important cross-cutting elements to ensure a whole of society approach and leave no one behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there support of parties for this statement? Now we will go through the list of non-parties and other observers, and each of them can talk for 2 minutes. The first on the list is IUCN.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN welcomes the work of the Ad Hoc Technical Expert Group and urges SBSTA to recommend to COP the adoption of a robust and comprehensive monitoring framework. Like South Africa, on behalf of Africa, Canada, and many others, IUCN supports maintaining the framework under review to fill identified gaps and stands ready to work with partners to further develop and improve methodologies related to the framework. For example, on a human-wildlife conflict and coexistence indicator. IUCN will also continue to maintain, update and expand relevant data and standards and supporting metadata, including the Red List of Threatened Species, Red List of Ecosystems, the Global Register of Introduced and Invasive Species, among others. IUCN stresses the need for a long-term strategy for the monitoring framework, which will need strengthened investment for the maintenance of existing indicators and the information that underpins them, and for strengthening and developing national capacity for monitoring and reporting. IUCN welcomes the recommendation of the RTEG to use the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology at Level 3 to ensure a consistent approach in monitoring ecosystems and disaggregating relevant headline indicators. Noting concerns expressed by some parties, IUCN stands ready to support parties with the alignment of national classification of ecosystems to the Global Ecosystem Typology at Level 3. Finally, we recommend linking Target 23 to the Gender Action Plan by including the latter in Binary Indicator Question 23.3, so that it reads, does your country explicitly recognise and consider gender in its implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework through its national reports, National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan, or implementation of a gender action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucien. Is there support of parties for this intervention? The next on the list is FAO, followed by GBF. GBF, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. FAO is responsible for over 20 indicators currently proposed in the monitoring framework, including 4 headline indicators and 16 component and complementary indicators, with FAO data also used in a broad range of other indicators. FAO has a technical capacity to support the implementation and monitoring of several targets and indicators. On Target 1, FAO is updating its integrated land use planning guidelines through an inclusive global consultation process, which could support the development and monitoring of indicator 1.1 on biodiversity inclusive integrated land use planning. On Target 2, FAO reiterates its commitment to supporting the headline indicator 2.1, which is closely aligned to effort under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. On Target 5, FAO has an ongoing program of work to upgrade its Global State of Stock Index, an indicator also used to report on progress of SDG 14.4. On Target 7, FAO reiterates its willingness and availability to support the further development of headline indicator 7.2 on aggregated total applied toxicity. On Target 10, the FAO guidelines for sustainable aquaculture highlight the importance of appropriate diversification of aquaculture species and farm types. These guidelines could inform the development of indicators to address the related gaps identified in Annex 3 for Target 10. On Target 22, FAO notes that the indicator on land use change and land tenure in indigenous and traditional territories of indigenous people and local communities meets the criteria for headline status outlined in COP Decision 15/5. FAO remains committed to supporting development and maintenance of these indicators as a custodian through the Global Land Observatory, working closely with the International Land Coalition, data collectors, and strategic partners.
May I ask you to finish your statement?
Yeah. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. GBF is the next one.
Thank you,
followed
Chair.
by
GBF welcomes the work of the RTEG on indicators. As the RTEG's report to Substa makes clear, the success of the monitoring framework will depend on continuing, increased, and sustained investment in data and monitoring systems at national level. Global collaborations such as GBF can ensure that such investments are effective and efficient by sharing tools and services, providing guidance and best practices, and developing capacity in data management and use of common standards. As mentioned in Annex 2 of Substa Document 26/2, GBF will work with GeoBon and other partners to further develop the methodology for headline indicator 21.1. In particular, we will be pleased to suggest ways in which analysis of data available through GBF can best track progress in filling data gaps and prioritize data mobilization efforts as an important component of achieving Target 21. We welcome the inclusion of the complementary indicator on growth in GBF-mediated records in the revised list of the RTEG, and remind parties that this can be disaggregated to national level. GBF also welcomes the proposal for Substa to consider options for a global biodiversity observing system. We emphasize that such a system must complement and build upon existing networks such as GBF. Finally, we note the dependency of headline indicator 6.1, the rate of invasive species establishment, on the Global Register of Introduced and Invasive Species, GRIS, managed by IUCN's Invasive Species Specialist Group and made accessible through GBF. We remind Substa that GRIS was established through the CBD's Global Invasive Alien Species Information Partnership which GBIF was pleased to coordinate. As with many of the data sources included in the monitoring framework, it is vital that a sustainable funding model is established for GRIS to ensure that this essential resource remains available for parties and enables them to report on Indicator 6.1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, GBIF. Gio, you have the floor, followed by Giobon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Global Biodiversity Framework introduces a monitoring framework with key indicators, many of which link to ecosystem data. Operationalizing the monitoring and reporting these indicator data will require accurate and up-to-date information about all types of ecosystems, and particularly their distribution and change. However, a significant challenge arises as we lack sufficient data on distribution and change of nearly half of the world's ecosystem types. This represents a technical challenge for countries seeking to implement and calculate the indicators to GBF. To close this gap, the Group on Earth Observations has convened a multi-partner initiative, the Global Ecosystems Atlas, to support countries in monitoring their NBSAPs and reporting of headline indicators, including supporting ecosystem mapping and alignment with the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology. The Atlas will be the first open global data resource for harmonized information about all the world's ecosystems aligned with the IUCN GET, as recommended by ATEG. By integrating high-quality global, regional, and national ecosystem maps, the Atlas initiative seeks collaboration with countries possessing national ecosystem maps to align them to the GET and accelerate closing of gaps. It also aims to aid countries with limited capacity by utilizing satellite imagery and advanced artificial intelligence techniques to develop national ecosystem maps and embedding them in national institutions. I invite governments to engage with the Atlas and encourage delegations to attend the side event on Wednesday evening in Conference Room 9 to learn more about this transformative initiative. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Gio. Giobon, you have the floor, followed by Minamata.
Thank you, Madam Chair. GBIF welcomes the conclusions of the ATEG on indicators and monitoring systems for the KM-GBF. The ATEG highlighted that there is a critical need for resources to support countries with the development of their monitoring systems and to support the sharing of biodiversity data. The meeting document SBSTA 26/2 on the monitoring framework of the KM-GBF proposes SBSTA consider options for how a global biodiversity observing system could be developed and operationalized. The ad hoc technical expert group on indicators provided a blueprint for assembling an international network of national biodiversity observing systems. GBIF proposes that this text could be adjusted to clarify that this blueprint should be seen as a mechanism to support parties with their national and local monitoring needs, including work with community-based monitoring and biodiversity information systems. Investment in national monitoring systems and the sharing of knowledge about how to do this will be of tremendous value to parties as they seek to implement their national monitoring frameworks. GBIF offers technical support to countries with the establishment of national biodiversity observation and monitoring networks, a coordinated international network of national biodiversity observation systems can work closely with the regional and sub-regional technical support centers and the proposed Global Knowledge Support Service for Biodiversity to support the implementation of the indicators of the monitoring framework. International coordination of biodiversity observations could accelerate the gathering of data needed to fill geographic gaps and lower the barriers to the gathering, access, and use of biodiversity data and knowledge. A global biodiversity observing system can be designed to support the work of all the parties of the UN CBD. Thank you.
Thank you, Giobon. Minamata, you have the floor, followed by IWC. Sorry, support for Giobon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. And it's good to see you all here. I'm speaking on behalf of the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and my statement is aligned with the views of the Secretariat of our sister Chemicals and Waste Conventions, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. We congratulate wholeheartedly the ATEG on indicators, as well as other intersessional processes since COP15, for their tremendous work to operationalize the indicators for the monitoring framework of the GBF. While the monitoring framework is an excellent starting point for tracking progress towards the GBF targets and goals, we agree with many of the previous speakers that there are significant gaps that need to be addressed, and there is room for improvement. In particular, the Chemicals and Waste Conventions are of the view that under Target 7, an indicator related to reducing the risk of highly hazardous chemicals is needed, and other indicators under Targets 22 and 23 related to the health of indigenous peoples, local communities, and women are also needed, and that these are serious omissions in the current list of headline indicators. While recognizing that Substa 26 is not expected to discuss the indicators per se, we believe that there is a need at this meeting to consider process post-COP16 to address these gaps. In this regard, the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention hopes that this meeting will recognize this need for such an inclusive process so that these major gaps can be filled. This could include building upon the existing biodiversity indicators partnership, for example. But importantly, this process could also take into account the availability of relevant data through other MEAs in such a way that it minimizes the burden, the reporting burden placed on parties. In practical terms, we hope that Substa 26 will invite the SBI to consider and recommend to COP16 such a process to address the gaps in headline indicators, clearly after COP16 and before COP17. I hope that parties can support this intervention, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minamata. Do we have support for this? The next on the list is IWC, followed by ICMOD.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the International Whaling Commission, I am pleased to contribute to the session of Substa 26. As the global body responsible for the conservation and management of whales and other cetaceans, the IWC contributes to several targets of the KM-GBF. IWC gathers world-leading experts to discuss the latest research in a range of fields related to cetacean science. The IWC Scientific Committee has a long-standing work program to understand the size, structure, and health of whale populations and assesses the potential impacts of the wide range of threats facing cetaceans today. This work is particularly relevant for Target 4 and headline indicator A4 on the proportion of populations within species with an effective population size superior to 500. The IWC is a repository for data on cetacean populations across the world that is being used to assess the state of whales, including some of the most threatened populations. These data could contribute to tracking this target and could thus constitute a relevant component or complementary indicator. The IWC's data can also be used to identify important marine areas for cetaceans, thus also contributing to Target 3. The IWC is an intergovernmental organization with a membership of 88 contracting governments. We have numerous resolutions calling for greater collaboration with other organizations and multilateral agreements, and we therefore stand ready to provide further information on our contributions to these indicators and to support the work of Substa 26. Thank you.
Thank you. Support from parties? Thank you. ICMOD, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The International Land Coalition welcomes the work of ATEG, particularly the results of the technical revision of the traditional knowledge indicators in INF 11, This review, reflected in the ATEG report in IN 14, determined that the indicator on land use change and land tenure in indigenous and traditional territories meets established criteria for headline status. We support statements made by the Women's Caucus and IAFB, specifically the proposal to elevate the land indicator to headline status for Target 22. We thank the African Group for supporting this proposal and welcome FAO's willingness to act as custodian to the land indicator. Secure land tenure and how land is effectively used belies the success of numerous targets of the KMGBF, but the critical role played by indigenous and traditional territories is not recognized in any of the proposed headline indicators. The traditional knowledge land indicator not only fills a gap in Target 22, where it is currently a component indicator, but ensures an application of Section C and would facilitate the use of this data for disaggregation of other headline indicators. While the binary indicator text for Target 22 has been greatly improved, it does not measure outcomes. The land indicator is operational and it's ready to be used by parties. It is supported by a custodian, the technical working group, including SDG custodians, and data is already available in at least 130 countries. We encourage its reconsideration for headline status and remain available to provide any clarifications about the metadata, data availability, and the use of this data by parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there support for this statement? Thank you very much. We have exhausted the list of all parties and non-parties, observers, before the list was closed. Now, I thank you for useful comments and suggestions. We have had a very rich discussion. On many issues, we note major areas of convergence. Also, we have a range of views that require further discussion. I propose to establish contact group with following mandate. The contact group will resolve the remaining issues with the binary questions that were not finalized at SABSTA 25. Resolve issues with the recommendation focusing on paragraphs where we have most comments. The contact group will be co-chaired by Mr. Ezequiel Benitez Diaz of Mexico and Ms. Anne Teller of European Commission. Together with co-chairs of the contact group and with support from the Secretariat, I will produce a non-paper for discussion by the contact group. All parties and observers are welcome to participate in the contact group in line with standard practice. I would like to remind you to make sure that you have uploaded your written statements. If not, please do so within 1 hour after the close of this session. Colleagues, we will now proceed with item 4, scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. I would like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So for this agenda item, Secretariat has prepared the document CBD/SABSTA/26/3 together with the two information documents numbered 15 and 16. The document 26/3 contains the result of the work in response to recommendation 25/3 of the subsidiary body, including a comprehensive review and analysis of existing tools and guidance that can support the implementation of the framework, identification of gaps and redundancies, and technical advice for the adjustment of work undertaking under the Convention. Information document 15 contains the details of the gap analysis with regard to the tools and guidance to support the implementation of the targets, and information document 16 contains a compilation of more than 1,200 scientific tools and guidance documents submitted by parties and stakeholders. Likewise, under the agenda item, the Secretariat has also prepared addendum document CBD/substa/26/3/addendum 1 regarding matters related to the work program of the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. As you have heard, we have two sets of recommendations in both pre-session document 3 and its addendum document. We will take interventions on the two sets of draft recommendations at the same time. In order to assist the Secretariat to follow your interventions, it will be important to identify the set of draft recommendations on which you are commenting. This will help the audience to understand your comments and assist the Secretariat in their efforts to capture them. I invite all of you to be concise as possible in your interventions. Following interventions by observers, I will give a brief chance for parties that may wish to comment or support any specific proposal made by these organizations. Please focus on essential points and submit the full text of your intervention to the Secretariat no later than 1 hour after close the session. Please note, however, that your key points, especially those that you would like to have reflected in the draft recommendations, should be read out in the room. Now I open the floor for your views on item 4.
Mexico takes note of the recommendations and conclusions under this agenda item for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework.
Including making sure that the different substantial definitions that have been set out in the framework of our convention are used. We need to look at the identified terms, which could include new activities, and I support the recommendation to COP to include and make progress on these themes regarding the spatial issues, which has an issue relating to biodiversity and activities, products and sustainable services based on biodiversity and bioeconomics, as well as conservation of the sustainable use of biodiversity with an equitable approach based on human rights. With regard to the proposal for a recommendation to COP, we would suggest that we include youth in paragraph 3, and insofar as the document's concerned, substa 23.6.1, take into account that the program of work for IPBES 2030 can only approve a new additional value on what was agreed in its 10th plenary. Mexico would like to propose that we support the evaluation of biodiversity and pollution so that this could help in reducing the lacks that have been identified for target 7 in accordance with the cluster on chemicals, we would have several suggestions and recommendations for paragraphs 1 and 2, and we will send these in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mexico. Canada, you have the floor, followed by Japan.
Thank you, Chair. In Canada's view, the focus of this item within Document 3 is to provide technical advice on realigning the future work under the CBD with the priorities set by the KMGBF as mandated by COP15 and further guided by SBSTA 25. In our view, it is essential for SBSTA to provide evidence-based information to inform the work to be undertaken by SBI4. Canada notes that the analysis summarized in SBSTA 6 Document 3, paragraphs 20 to 35, are not completely aligned with the information provided in INF 15. In Canada's view, SBSTA should clearly identify the scientific and technical needs and gaps for SBI4 to effectively undertake its work on the following items: programs of work, multi-year program of work of the Convention, and administrative and budgetary matters. This information could also help to inform the items on cooperation, mainstreaming, and capacity building, scientific and technical assistance, the clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management. In Canada's view, if SBSTA 26 completes its task in identifying the key targets in need of further work to align with and support the KMGBF, and SBI4 determines the forward agenda in the multi-year program of work, then there would be no need for the intersessional work proposed in paragraph 5 of the SBSTA recommendation and paragraph 6 of the draft COP16 decision. Our preference would be to have SBSTA 26 identify the gaps at this meeting and for SBI4 to determine the forward agenda for consideration by COP16. To capture these points, Canada would like to suggest an alternative text for further consideration. We will submit our proposal in writing, and we remain committed to work constructively with parties towards an outcome that reflects these views. On IPBES in document Add 1, Canada suggests moving the request in paragraph 3 of the SBSTA recommendation on IPBES to paragraph 2 bis of the related draft COP16 decision. Canada supports efforts to strengthen cooperation between IPBES, the IPCC, and the biodiversity-related conventions, and can agree to submitting a fast-track assessment that aligns with and supports the KMGBF and with the identified needs and gaps. We look forward to engaging with parties on these matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Japan, you have the floor, followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan generally supports the draft recommendations and COP16 decisions as presented in the document SBSTA 26/3. However, Japan has 3 general comments in order to ensure efficient implementation of the work of the Secretariat. First, as expressed by many parties at SBSTA 25, considering the limited time available for the implementation of the GBF, work plans should be implemented in a synergetic manner without causing any duplicating work, and such work should be focused strictly to those that promote and streamline the efforts of the implementation of the GBF. Second, we consider that the Secretariat should focus and prioritize its resources to the implementation of the GBF using existing tools and guidance documents adopted by COP and developed by other relevant organizations, as well as relevant strategies decided at COP15, particularly in the areas of resource mobilization and capacity building. In this regard, we would like to support the paragraph 10 and 41 of the document SBSTA 26/3. Finally, Although Japan would generally agree with the need for some new work areas under the convention described in 4A of the document 26/3. However, we believe that we should limit the number of extent of new work areas strictly to those which are necessary for the implementation of a GBF and make full use of the existing tools and ongoing work implemented by relevant organizations and frameworks such as FAO and IPES. Regarding the term bioeconomy, it needs to be clarified and adequately discussed before using the term, as we believe it has not been defined at the convention as well as in the GBF. Japan will submit our proposals for the text changes in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. South Africa, you have the floor, followed by New Zealand.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. South Africa makes this statement on behalf of the Africa Group. Africa takes notes of the finding of the analysis of the scientific and technical needs to support implementation of the KMGBF, including the identification of the gaps in tools and guidance. While the analysis is welcome, we note that limitation on the tools and guidance that were used to inform the analysis, and that there are numerous sources of guidance that could have informed this analysis. For example, the Global Species Action Plan that has been developed by the IUCN and partners, whose online knowledge platform will be launched this week. We also note that the analysis did not take into account some elements of the knowledge gaps identified by the different assessments produced by the IPES, and their consideration may enhance the comprehensive analysis amongst others. We therefore request that this analysis be updated to include those knowledge gaps identified above, and also inform the section on the tools that are cross-cutting, and specifically those that are going to support the parties when updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plan. Madam Chair, while Africa supports the 4 topics on which new work may be advanced, Africa would like to make the following proposal on the key gaps on tools and guidance to support implementation. Under Target 14, Africa knows that SABSTA 25 in its recommendation requested the Executive Secretary to collaborate with partners and with the collaborative partnerships on sustainable wildlife management, and recommends that sustainable wildlife management be added as an area that requires urgent and additional work, as this is linked to the second objective of the convention. Furthermore, genetic diversity, Madam Chair, is very fundamental to achieving the ambitious global biodiversity framework, and Africa acknowledged the great progress already achieved by several countries in quantifying the new genetic indicators in several developing and developed nations. However, to fully capture and measure the genetic statuses of species, population, additional capacity in terms of at least personnel and capacity building is required to assess the wide range of species across the threat status, taxonomic groups, and ecosystem types. Even more resources will be needed to generate actual genetic data, although we acknowledge this might not be necessary to quantify the indicators. Under Target 8, the concept of nature-based solution is still relatively new, with the level of policy support tools remaining in its infancy stage, although accelerating. Existing guidance may not have the level of detail required for direct uptake into policy, especially with respect to setting standards and safeguards and its applicability to certain sectors. We therefore recommend for the development of a new voluntary guideline to support parties in the integration of nature-based solutions into their NBSAP and informing the setting of their national target. This will imply that voluntary guidelines on ecosystem-based adaptation do not need to be revised to include aspects of mitigation. but these aspects of mitigation shall be dealt with within the new guidelines on nature-based solution. Under Target 15, Africa believed that the eBirth methodological assessment on business and biodiversity, which is currently underway, will greatly assist in bridging the gaps, and therefore request that the eBirth Secretariat to take note of the gaps that are articulated under Target 15 when finalizing their assessment. Lastly, Madam Chair, Africa requests the Executive Secretary to consider, in addition to the many gaps identified in the present document, the gaps for the monitoring framework identified by the ITEC on indicators. Capacity building is also, capacity building, scientific and technical support is also crucial to our region and wishes to stress the needs for synergies to cover the gaps identified in this topic. I thank you.
Thank you, South Africa, on behalf of Africa. New Zealand, you have the floor, followed by Colombia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. New Zealand thanks the Secretariat for their excellent analysis for this agenda item and supports the substantive recommendation in Document 26.3, advancing new work or guidance on a limited number of topics within existing work programs where possible. In New Zealand's view, we would usefully advance new areas of work in a small number of areas subject to resourcing, such as biodiversity, inclusive spatial planning, addressing land use change, and pollution and biodiversity. Any mandate for new work programs under the CBD, however, should align closely with the GBF targets it is aiming to support. So in relation to biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, we would align this more closely to Target 1 by adding addressing land use change, or the words to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance close to zero. This reflects that the purpose of this target is to reduce natural ecosystem loss due to land and sea use change. Similarly, in any proposal on sustainable bio-based activities, we would align this more closely to the GBF Target 9, which also included the qualification that enhance biodiversity. So we would add those words. Similarly, on this, any work program on sustainable bio-based activities, we suggest this could be expanded to include biodiversity incentives and the other elements of Target 19D, such as stimulating innovative schemes such as payments for ecosystem services. We support the proposed work on pollution and biodiversity, provided that this avoids duplication with other processes under the UN and the Global Instrument on Plastic Pollution. We will also submit in writing a number of specific and discrete gaps where we think we could focus additional work under existing work programs. Finally, we think we need to be really aware that we're not excessively adding to our existing work here. So New Zealand remains open to exploring whether some CBD programs could be discontinued or deprioritized. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colombia, you have the floor, followed by Belgium.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We'd like to convey our gratitude to the Secretariat for the outstanding work carried out regarding the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We'd also like to thank the states and organizations who have sent inputs for its development. We would like to thank you for the analysis which has been carried out, as well as the tools which were used to improve the implementation of the global framework. We're of course here talking about capacity building, technical scientific cooperation mechanisms, as well as support brought at a regional and sub-regional level. There is a need to adopt a regional approach, generally speaking. We also emphasize the need to deploy a special support for capacity building of indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants and local communities. Colombia believes that there are gaps in terms of knowledge gaps which need to be filled. And for this reason, we have to make every possible effort to ensure that we're able to fight against biodiversity loss. Colombia has identified various shortcomings and gaps, and we believe that there is a need to stress the link that exists between climate change and biodiversity. As proposed by Mexico, we stand ready and in favor of the program of work of IPES, and we hope that the recommendations that were made will be taken into account. We have further comments to make on the text, but we'll send this to you in writing.
Thank you very much, Colombia. Belgium, you have the floor, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belgium will only briefly touch upon most of its comments in the allocated time during this intervention, but will hand in our amendments in writing. We agree with the analysis of gaps and the proposed intersessional work between SBSTA 26, SBI 4 and COP 16 to further develop a proposal for scope of work to be considered at COP 16. The recommendation should be adapted so a process is started for this new work and for the gaps in the current work programs. We also suggest that SBSTA recognizes the current work programs mentioned in Chapter 4, Section B of SBSTA 26/3 that could be updated based on document INF 15. We also propose to remind parties about the link to subjects that relate to the scientific and technical needs that will be discussed at SBI 4 and propose an active sharing process of available guidance to mainstream the GBF into biodiversity inclusive guidance and tools from other international agreements and other sectors. We prefer to welcome the identified scope of work as outlined in the draft COP decision, but the subparagraphs should remain bracketed till the review during the intersessional process on these is done. We would also propose to welcome the establishments of the regional and sub-regional centers for technical and scientific cooperation and to encourage them to make use of the available tools and guidance in their capacity building and development work. Furthermore, we propose the added centers as actors that can give feedback on the use of the guidance and tools. With regards to IPBS, we look forward to discussing the different proposals for a further fast-track assessment and for improving the collaboration between COP, SBI, SBSTA and IPBS. We are of the view that SBSTA 26 should focus on improving the collaboration between the Convention and the platform, and that the list of potential topics forwarded by CBD COP 16 should not be too long or too many, and should take into consideration the ongoing IPBS activities. We will submit our changes in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Switzerland, you have the floor, followed by Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We consider the proposed recommendations in document SBSTA 26/3 as a good basis for discussion and would like to highlight the following. After the adoption of the KMGBF, Switzerland is of the view that we should align our efforts under the CBD and under the other biodiversity-related conventions with the goals and targets of the KMGBF. In addition, Switzerland takes note of the findings of the analysis of scientific and technical needs to support implementation of the KMGBF, including the identification of gaps in tools and guidances as described in the pre-session document. As the KMGBF is a framework for all, including for all other relevant multilateral environmental agreements, we consider it to be important that efforts to fill the identified gaps or to undertake new work should be done in consultation and in cooperation with other relevant multilateral environmental agreements. This is important in order to avoid duplication of efforts and to ensure that we use existing tools and guidances where relevant. With regard to the pre-session document Add 1 on matters related to IPBES, Switzerland would like to highlight the following points. On the proposed SBSTA decision, Switzerland notes that the list of potential topics for a further fast-track assessment by IPBES misses the suggestion for an assessment on biodiversity and climate change. In our view, the list should focus on the following topics. First, biodiversity and pollution, and second, biodiversity and climate change. In this context, Switzerland suggests to amend the topic of biodiversity and pollution to biodiversity and chemicals, waste and pollution, as it more closely reflects the broad spectrum of the issue and the scope of the soon-to-be-established Science Policy Panel on the sound management of chemicals, waste, and to prevent pollution. With regard to the recommendation for a COP decision, Switzerland considers the proposed request to the Executive Secretary to continue its close cooperation with IPBES to be important. It should, however, come from the COP and not from SBSTA. Furthermore, we suggest that the Executive Secretary should liaise not only with the IPBES Secretariat, but also with the Bureau and the multidisciplinary expert panel of the platform. Finally, Madam Chair, we suggest to have a standing item under SBSTA to consider the outputs of all the functions of IPBES with a view to prepare recommendations for consideration by the Convention. We will submit the suggested changes in writing. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Brazil, you have the floor, followed by Sweden.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil appreciates the revised analysis of the scientific and technical needs produced by the Secretariat in response to Subsidy Recommendation 25/3. We are overall supportive of the 4 additional areas proposed under paragraph 2 of the draft recommendation and paragraph 3 of the draft decision. We notice that potential work on biodiversity-based products and services and bioeconomy provides an opportunity to raise the visibility of biodiversity's contributions to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And this could build on work undertaken by other organizations and initiatives, including FAO and the G20 Initiative on Bioeconomy launched by Brazil this year. As though 4 additional areas may relate to topics addressed by other multilateral processes, we would add a caveat to the chapeau, recognizing that additional work needs to be undertaken in a manner consistent with relevant international obligations and in a non-duplicative approach and within the jurisdictional scope of the Convention. Regarding the summary of key gaps presented in the annex, we notice that this summary has introduced a number of elements that go beyond the scope of the agreed goals and targets, and risk provide an unbalanced understanding of each goal and target. Therefore, we are not convinced that this summary provides a basis for preparing additional tools or guidance as suggested by paragraph 6.a of the draft decision. Given the substantive workload ongoing under the Convention, we understand that our efforts to prioritize the implementation of the GBF on the ground. That said, we're not convinced of the need to develop new draft tools and/or guidance at this stage, as suggested by paragraph 6.e of the draft decision. We further believe the potential requests for submissions, as suggested by paragraph 5 of the draft recommendation, could be deferred and be undertaken after COP16. As most countries are still finalizing the revision of their NBSAPs, we understand it would be more productive to wait until countries have a clear picture of their challenges at the national and local levels. Regarding document 26/3 at 1, Brazil strongly supports further work from IPAs on biodiversity and poverty, as we understand that the 3 objectives of the Convention provide an opportunity to support the livelihoods of biodiversity-dependent communities, and many biodiversity-rich regions struggle with persistent levels of poverty, food insecurity, and inequality. With regards to the annex, we know that from Brazil's perspective, the reports from expert workshops do not stand in equal footing as the assessments that have been mandated by the IPAS Plenary. And we know that those workshops have not been convened in a manner consistent with the rules of procedure of IPAS and IBCC. That said, we would suggest replacing the reference to deliverables with reference to the assessments, which have undergone extensive peer review process by members. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Sweden, you have the floor, followed by Morocco.
Thank you, Chair. Sweden takes note of CBD/SUBSTA/26/3 and thank the Executive Secretary for the work undertaken to review the current programs of work. Sweden recognized the importance to update current programs of work, as well as advancing work on new areas, in order to address gaps in scientific and technical guidance to facilitate and strengthen the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We consider it unclear how the suggested new and updated areas of work have been prioritized in relation to other needs and gaps identified in the analysis. As these proposals have not yet been reviewed, Sweden supports the request to the Executive Secretary to invite parties and observers to provide submissions on their views and relevant experiences, and to prepare a note setting out the proposed scope of work for the information of COP16. It is our view that also the current work programs where gaps have been identified should be part of this review. Sweden proposed SUBSTA to invite SBI4 to consider scientific and technical needs for the implementation of the KM-GBF under relevant agenda items. In addition to the agenda items mentioned in Chapter 5 of SUBSTA/26/3, we also consider mainstreaming a relevant agenda item to consider scientific and technical needs in order to strengthen mainstreaming of biodiversity in the implementation of the framework. Aware that there are several work programs being updated or developed that will be welcomed or adopted during COP16 and the COP MOPs of its protocols, we propose to add a placeholder in the draft COP recommendation where reference to these work programs can be added. Also aware that there are several requests for sharing tools and guidance in draft decisions for COP16 and the COP MOPs of its protocols, we propose to add a placeholder in the draft COP recommendation where reference to these requests can be added. Finally, Sweden takes note of CBD/SUBSTA/26/3/add1 on matters related to the work program of IPES. Concerning input to the IPES program of work running up to 2030, as in our submission to notification 2024-006, Sweden would like to see climate and biodiversity added to the list of themes to be considered to propose for a new fast-track methodological assessment by IPES. We would like to recall paragraph 13 of decision 15/9 regarding the inclusion of a forward schedule and regular agenda item in SUBSTA meetings and ask the Secretariat on how it plans to implement this decision in the future to allow for a systematic consideration of IPES deliverables from all functions and processes and their relevance for the work of the Convention. Sweden will submit textual suggestions in writing and request that it will be considered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. Morocco, you have the floor, followed by Indonesia.
Madame la Présidente. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Kingdom of Morocco supports South Africa on behalf of the African Group. The Kingdom of Morocco would like to congratulate the Secretariat of CBD for the deep analysis of the tools and the existing orientations, which could support the implementation of objectives and targets, including the identification of gaps in the tools and the orientations described in CBD Substa 26.3, and welcomes this. Furthermore, the Kingdom of Morocco supports the questions that have been put forward to assist us in our work, the planning, spatial planning, which is respectful of biodiversity, pollution and biodiversity, the activities and products and services related to biodiversity and bioeconomy, as well as equity based on human rights for sustainable use of soil and conservation. And in that context, the Kingdom of Morocco would like to highlight the crucial importance of having a clear work plan with adequate financing and clear guidelines for its implementation. This approach is essential in order to ensure fluid transformation towards sustainable development, and we'd also like to welcome the strengthening of links with other groups such as IPBES so that we can better support the implementation of the framework. We're also in favour of the use of tools and orientations which are appropriate to support the implementation of the framework based on our own experiences to have better conservation of biodiversity. I thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Morocco. Indonesia, you have the floor, followed by Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With regard to the inputs on the extensions of analysis in spatial planning, pollutions and biodiversity, bioeconomy, equity, and human rights-based approach, our delegation is of the view that we should, at one side, recognize the ambitious target of KMGBF, and on the other hand, we should also be realistic and pragmatic in our effort to achieve those targets. In this regard, Indonesia is of the positions that additions such as the use of bioeconomy term or addition of issues should be refrained. At this stage, we are still facing some challenges on several indicators based on agreed target at COP15. Furthermore, Indonesia is of the view that we should revisit the low achievement of the Aichi target. Lastly, we would like to reiterate that all the targets we agreed at COP15 have reflected our ambitious and great commitment. In this regard, we should focus our effort to implement those targets and take action collaboratively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. Guatemala, you have the floor, followed by Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With regard to the potential areas for new work under the Convention, the comments we have related to pollution and biodiversity We see it as urgent to have synergy to strengthen the process of creation of an international instrument on plastic waste. We also welcome the fact that this is to examine other sources of pollution which affect biodiversity, and chemicals would be one of these. With regard to the activities, products and services which are sustainable based on biodiversity and bioeconomy, we believe that this is an area of work which is fundamental. So, because sustainable use of biodiversity should be a strategy for development, and this would assist us for conservation, particularly for developing countries which have high levels of biology and culture, respecting just and equitable and use based on sustainable use, and respecting traditional knowledge as well, prior informed consent, and the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, which we believe is needs to be explicitly mentioned in the text of the recommendation for COP. The speaker was speaking very fast. The interpreters do not have most of these statements. Please, could the speakers slow down?
Guatemala, you have not been understood by translators.
The interpreters do not have the text. He was well understood, but we require the text or for the speakers to speak more slowly. Thank you.
Russian Federation, you have the floor, followed by Spain.
Уважаемая госпожа председатель.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We welcome the very hard work that has been done in terms of the scientific and technical needs to contribute to the implementation of the framework, particularly in order to identify the gaps in indicators. We hope that the solution of gaps will allow us to develop the program at different levels. We're also in agreement with Brazil on the need to work on the convention with other United Nations instruments by making sure that we avoid duplication and without extending the mandate of the convention. A new program of work taking into account biodiversity would seem to be premature, since we have not yet examined the issues relating to specialized agencies of the United Nations on human rights. Perhaps we could ask COP16 to look at these organizations and to ask them themselves to draw up proposals so that parties can examine specific documents on considerations relating to human rights, so that they're able to take decisions in the convention on that basis. We believe that COP is not an instrument to resolve questions relating to human rights, and at this point, this part of the text should be excluded, and we are in agreement with South Africa in terms of the list of work that needs to be carried out for the management of conflicts between fauna and flora, and particularly with working on the relevant indicators as well. Under item 15, it is indicated that we need to examine an instrument by the Secretariat which should give us a new reformulation for item 6, so that we do not have repetition of and our specific recommendations will be sent by us in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Spain, you have the floor, followed by Ukraine.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We note the relevance of identifying what issues have not yet been dealt with by the Convention. We note with satisfaction that the Secretariat, the parties and other agents are making progress in terms of the potential areas of work. and in the specific elements that should be strengthened in accordance with document substa 26.3, paragraph 4a. We also highlight the value of the work programmes, tools and guidance that have been developed by the Convention and other multilateral agreements, and stress the need to take all this material into account when considering additional tools to strengthen implementation. We support the regional and sub-regional centres for technical and scientific cooperation as key actors to contribute to the identification of the needs of the Convention and the implementation of the global framework. We therefore propose some amendments to the recommendation to reflect this role. Finally, Spain supports the strengthening of the collaboration between the Convention and IPBES and joint exploration to improve it. The suggested themes for the next rapid assessments are necessary to make progress in areas that require further development, especially the assessment for cities and biodiversity, as they contribute substantially to the implementation of the global framework in many of its targets, particularly targets 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 14 and 15. We will submit our detailed proposal in writing. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Spain. The next on the list is European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The European Union supports the statement made by Belgium, and we will therefore only add a few additional points. We would like to emphasize the interlinkages between this agenda item and agenda item 3 on the monitoring framework of the KMGBF. In particular, the research needs identified in Annex 3 in Substa 26/2 and Section 3 of Substa 26/INF/19. We also believe that the issue of biodiversity and climate change adaptation and mitigation is very important, where further advances in work is needed. Regarding IPBES, the European Union would like to emphasize that we should consider deliverables and outputs of all 4 functions of IPBES. Finally, the European Union supports the previous interventions to add biodiversity and climate change to the list and options for a further IPBES fast-track assessment. We will provide our proposed amendments in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Germany, followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for providing additional information and work on item 4. Germany echoes interventions made by other parties and would like to question the reference to the concept of bioeconomy made in agenda item 4. With regard to IPBES, Germany would like to thank the Secretariat for providing additional information on collaboration between the Convention and the platform. We see potential to further improve the joint work of the Convention and the platform and would like to propose ways to enhance the institutional cooperation, such as, first, by identifying a contact person in the CBD Secretariat to liaise with the platform to ensure timely and informal two-way communication related to all relevant objects of the work of IPBES. Second, by conducting an analysis on how collaboration between the Convention and the platform could be enhanced, taking into account views expressed by parties following CBD notification number 6 of 2024. Third, we would like to ask the Secretariat how it plans to implement paragraph 13 of decision 15/19 regarding a regular IPBES item in future Substa meetings, since a systematic consideration of all IPBES deliverables would enable more streamlined meetings of Substa and COP. With regard to a potential further fast-track assessment topic for the IPBES work program up to 2030, several topics would be worth considering for future assessments, while at the same time taking into consideration ongoing IPBES activities, in particular the scoping of the second global assessment. We would also like to see the proposal for an assessment on biodiversity and climate change in the final list for consideration, as mentioned in several submissions by parties. We underline the need to coordinate with the IPCC on this topic and to reflect it in the annex with future deliverables to be included in the relevant decision by COP16. We will submit our proposal for amendments in writing for consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Franz, but I would like to close the list of speakers for these interventions. Franz, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Now, we believe that the two draft recommendations associated with this agenda item of SABSA 26 are a sound basis for our discussion. France is going to focus its statement on the additional documents 1 concerning elements related to the program of work of IPBES. Now, we are pleased to be able to discuss the various proposals for accelerated assessment for the work of IPBES during COP16. We believe that it is important that SABSA 26 be in a position to tackle issues of forging greater institutional cooperation between the platform and CBD. We propose to strengthen language here, inter alia in paragraph 3 of the draft recommendations to COP16. We would also like to strengthen the reference to cooperation between IPBES and the other scientific and political panels to step up synergies between their various programs of work and thus avoid overlap and duplication, inter alia in program 1 of the draft recommendations to COP16. We will, of course, send you all of these comments in writing. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Franz. Austria, you have the floor, followed by Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Austria thanks the Secretariat for the analysis carried out on the scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the framework. In this context, we would like to underline, in general, the importance of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans as primary guidance for parties for the implementation of the GBF. We also would like to draw the attention to the many tools and guidance already developed under the CBD and other relevant processes which contribute to the implementation of the GBF and its goals and targets and therefore need to be best used in the best way. With regard to the potential gaps identified for possible new areas of work under the Convention, we believe that the areas outlined in the 4 subparagraphs included in the recommendation for a decision of the COP should be bracketed as further considerations need to be given to such new work areas under the Convention. Without having a clear understanding of what it means to have these new work areas, we are not in a position to give our support to these proposals. Having said this, we believe that the topics biodiversity, inclusive special planning, and pollution and biodiversity, which are specifically addressed in targets of the GBF, would require priority attention for further work under the CBD. Also to stress that in this context, the work carried out by other processes need to be fully taken into account. We have proposals for amending the related paragraphs in document 26.3 along these lines, which we will hand over in writing. We welcome the establishment of the regional and sub-regional centers for technical and scientific cooperation, as this can contribute to address and fill gaps related to scientific and technical needs for the implementation of the GBF. We also underline the importance of close and effective collaboration between the CBDs through the COP and IPBES and support proposals in this regard. Cognitions of the ongoing work of IPBES, we believe that a list of potential topics to be forwarded to IPBES needs to be considered in light of this ongoing work of IPBES and the resources available by the platform. This said, we support the proposal of the European Union and others related to an assessment on biodiversity and climate change as a priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Austria. Malaysia, you have the floor, followed by Uruguay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malaysia acknowledges the findings of the scientific and technical needs assessments in order to support the implementation of the KMGBF by identifying potential new work areas and areas of gaps. The findings, as detailed in the pertinent documents, indicate the need for the greater efforts to strengthen scientific and technical capacities, particularly those relevant to Malaysia. This includes promoting biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, biodiversity and climate change mitigation, as well as the bioeconomy. In this respect, Malaysia would like to emphasize the need for adequate means of support, including financial resources, the transfer of technology, and capacity building for effective implementation of the KMGBF. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. Uruguay, you have the floor, followed by Malawi.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Uruguay considers that very relevant work has been done in terms of systematizing the information on the existing tools that can guide and contribute to the implementation of the global framework. We thank all the parties and organizations that have contributed to this process. With regard to the analysis of information gaps and guidelines, Uruguay agrees with the proposed recommendation in document CBD Substar A 26.3 and considers it important to promote work in the 4 areas identified in point 3. We also share the proposed recommendation in document CBD Substar 26 Add 1 on topic options for the development of rapid assessments for consideration by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Once again, the speaker is speaking too fast.
Thank you, Uruguay, but I would like to ask everyone to speak slowly because of translation. Thank you very much. Malawi, you have the floor, followed by Hungary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malawi supports the statement that was made by South Africa on behalf of Africa and has taken note of the draft recommendations, most of which are welcome for us. We especially welcome paragraph 29 of the findings and paragraph 6B of the draft decision, and as indeed tools and guidance in relation to biodiversity and sustainable fisheries in inland waters are important for effective adoption and implementation of targets 5 and 9. Madam Chair, considering that parties have different capacities that would affect their uptake and implementation of the GBF, we would like to indicate that while some technical and scientific guidance and tools might not be seen as important by other parties, not having those guidance and tools would limit other parties from effective adoption and implementation of the KPGF. We therefore request that the important areas that may benefit from technical and scientific support, as highlighted by South Africa on behalf of Africa, including on nature-based solution as it relates to Target 8 and on the 2 protocols of the Convention, be considered. We support the identification of biodiversity inclusive spatial planning as an area recommended for new work, and would like to indicate that South Africa, Namibia, Malawi, and Mozambique, through the generous support of Agency France Development, are currently implementing a project on spatial biodiversity planning in Southern Africa. These 4 parties therefore request to be directly engaged as work progresses to address the gaps identified on biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. Finally, we support the statement made by Belgium on the role of regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers on the scientific and technical support that is being mentioned here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Hungary, you have the floor, followed by Poland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hungary would like to thank the outstanding work carried out by the Secretariat on the analysis of existing tools and guidance and key gaps to support implementation of the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We note that references to relevant multilateral environmental agreements, as well as to the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers and the Global Knowledge Support Service for Biodiversity, are missing from subparagraphs 6A and B of the draft decision contained in document CBD/Substar/26/3. Therefore, Hungary proposes to add them to the current text. We also note that the annex to the draft decision is not referred to in the text of the draft Substar recommendation, nor in the draft COP decision. Therefore, we propose to delete the annex referring to the key gaps in tools and guidance to support implementation of the targets of the KMGBF. Madam Chair, we have submitted our proposals for textual amendments through the uploading tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Hungary. Poland, you have the floor, followed by Uganda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Poland in general supports the recommendations included in document prepared by the Secretariat on scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the GPF. Great work was done by the Secretariat, and a lot of tools and instruments are available. So in general, we can support recommendations. Nevertheless, we would like to propose several additions and changes in the draft text. In order to save our time, now I would like only to highlight paragraph 6 of draft COP16 recommendations. In paragraph 6, the mention subject to available resources is missing and should be added to the text. In the same paragraph 6, we propose to add a paragraph B bis to ask the Secretariat to do work that is linked to the scope of work mentioned in the note of the Secretariat that Belgium asked for in paragraph 5 of the Substa 26 recommendation, and also referred to in paragraph 2 of the draft COP decision. Thank you, Madam Chair, and we will submit our changes in writing.
Thank you, Poland. Uganda, you have the floor, followed by Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda aligns itself with the statement made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. Madam Chair, capacity building, capacity development, and technology transfer is a critical area in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This is an area that has been extensively discussed over the years, so there is a need to re-examine the approach that has been used in providing the capacity building, capacity development, technology transfer, and scientific cooperation so that it achieves the intended purpose both in the short and long term. Madam Chair, Uganda supports the draft recommendations as presented. However, we propose that the second draft recommendation should contain elements on capacity building, capacity development, scientific cooperation, and technology transfer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Uganda. Netherlands, you have the floor, followed by India.
Thank you very much for the floor, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. The Netherlands agrees with the analysis of the gaps and the proposed intersessional work between Substa 26, SBI, and COP16, and to further develop the proposal for scope work to be considered at COP16. The Netherlands aligns with the intervention of Belgium and others and agrees that some improvements should be made for the recommendation. We will not repeat those elements here, but add on to the interventions that have already been made. In paragraph 3, we propose to add the targets for which further work is needed, based on the analysis done on these targets, in order to make it more clear where the topics originated from. Regarding the addition of the bioeconomy, the Netherlands is looking for some clarification from the Secretariat how it ended up in the document, since bioeconomy is not part of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. The subparagraphs in paragraph 3 should be bracketed until the review of this assessment is done. Regarding IPBES, the Netherlands is looking forward to discuss the different proposals for fast-track assessments. In discussing the fast-track assessments, it's important to take into account processes that are ongoing in different bodies. Regarding biodiversity and pollution, in the scientific and technical needs part of this agenda item in Substa, it is also mentioned as a priority, and it has been a request by the COP in COP15, but it has not yet been included in the IPBES work program. We underline the need to coordinate with the new Science Policy Panel on Chemicals and Waste and Pollution Prevention, and try to reflect this in an annex with possible assessment topics to be included in the relevant decision by COP16. And regarding cities and biodiversity, this could potentially also have some good synergies with the upcoming IPBES report on cities and climate change, set out to be delivered in 2027. Finally, we also align with Germany and others that there is merit in adding biodiversity and climate change to the list as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Netherlands. India, you have the floor, followed by Argentina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Effective biodiversity conservation is impeded by gaps in current knowledge and data, both locally and globally. Over the past 4 decades, conservation biology has seen shifts from problem-focused and solution-oriented research, leading to periodic shortage of actionable data. This fluctuation sometimes results in lack of data relevant to practical conservation. Despite extensive research on biodiversity and ecosystem governance in broader landscapes, disparities exist in disseminating, interpreting, and applying findings in policymaking. The issue extends beyond information scarcity to encompass accessibility, interoperability, and relevance for diverse stakeholders. Ambiguous objectives seem to hinder the effectiveness of global commitments such as KMGBF. The limitations of metrics to track progress compound this issue, impeding the effectiveness of national and regional institutions implementing these agreements. The CBD struggled to report progress earlier implementing the Aichi targets due to lack of quantifiable indicators. Therefore, there is a scope for improving global commitments. For example, the KMGBF may further facilitate to set smart local targets, that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic local targets with reliable metrics. It was proposed that any work to be advanced in these areas should be in cooperation with relevant organizations, intergovernmental processes, and initiatives. This would leverage existing guidance, especially which prepared under the auspices of competent intergovernmental processes to avoid redundancy and promote mainstreaming of biodiversity within those other organizations, processes, and initiatives. While appreciating the need for filling up the gaps in knowledge and data for effective implementation of NBSAP, India would like to mention here that the CBD Secretariat or GBFF Council may develop an appropriate institutional mechanism for ensuring a transparent and consultative mechanism for sanction of PPGs as per national priorities. Unilateral processing decisions or rejection of PPG by GBFF is bound to have an adverse impact on the effective and efficient implementation of NBSAP that feeds into
India,
KFGBF.
can you speak slower, please?
Thank you.
The interpreters regret to have to announce once again that the speakers are speaking too fast. It is too fast for us to interpret properly.
India, you
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah.
You still can talk. If you didn't finish your statement, but if you can talk slower, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to ask everyone to speak slower. Slow down, please, when you talk, because of translation. Argentina, you have the floor, followed by Egypt.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Argentina thanks the Secretariat for its work on the analysis of the scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and takes note of it. We also agree with the importance of the voluntary guidance developed under the Convention on Biological Diversity for the implementation of the global framework. However, Argentina considers that efforts should focus on the implementation of existing guidance. There is a need to strengthen the capacity of developing states parties to use the tools and guidelines. The intersessional period through to COP16 is an intense one, with an agenda of substantive issues and with a large amount of work pending prior to October. Argentina observes with concern this overloading of the agenda and the potential implications this may have on the participation of developing countries. In this regard, Argentina considers that progress should be made on a limited number of new items and supports the proposal to work on sustainable activities, products and services based on biodiversity and the bioeconomy. On the other hand, Argentina considers that efforts should be made to avoid overlapping with the work of other intergovernmental fora and therefore supports the proposal for work on pollution and biodiversity, that this should await the finalization of the negotiations to establish the science policy platform on the sound management of chemicals and waste and avoidance of pollution, that is the SPP. Work on pollution and biodiversity should be done in conjunction with that process and not in parallel. Argentina also proposes that work on new issues should start after COP16. We will send written proposals for modifications to the draft recommendations and decisions in line with the ideas we have here voiced. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Speaker.
Thank you, Argentina. Egypt, you have the floor, followed by Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Egypt would support the statement given by South Africa on behalf of African Group. At the same time, we would like to thank the Secretariat for the excellent work they have prepared in the 4 documents already submitted for us here. We are also in agreement with Belgium and EU on some of the issues, especially those related to the link between this agenda item 4 and 3, as well as the biodiversity and climate change and cooperation with IBBS and others as well. In addition to that, the issue of synergies among the MEAs need to be expanded in a way that all of us, we can benefit from it. Madam Chair, very clearly, we have to recognize there are existing many tools and knowledge that are available at the CBD and other organizations as well. And we also recognize more needed to be done. Our main concern here, who is going to implement these tools? Such tools required huge resources and capacity building and other resources in a way that all of us, we can benefit from that. And that's why I keep asking for consideration of a new indicator, we call it ethical indicators, because as I said before, these are the God creations, which means that all of us, we can benefit and share the benefits as well in a way that all of us, we can help to implement the GBF in a way that can be acceptable to all of us. Otherwise, we will face serious problem in the future. We have to learn from experience, whether from our local experience or experience from many other places as well. So we urge Secretariat and whoever involved in the whole process to consider long-term indicators called ethical indicators, because we have to work together. We are facing serious problem, Madam Chair. We are even witnesses here in Nairobi and many other places. Crisis exists everywhere. We need all of us to work together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. Jordan, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you indeed, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would like to start by conveying my gratitude to the Secretariat for the document that they have prepared. This document is a comprehensive one which summarizes all of the problems and scientific and technical needs which we face. However, what we do have to do when we look at it is also refer to financing. Madam Chair, a great deal of discussion has taken place on the bioeconomy and how to incorporate into or integrate it into the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This happened within the framework of the 24th meeting. And I believe that the conclusion at the time was that there was disagreement regarding the concepts and definitions as well as the resources. And if there is an item that we must discuss at the next COP, it is the bioeconomy. I believe that today we have to focus on issues related to the framework which was agreed during COP15. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Jordan. United Kingdom, you have the floor, followed by Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for their work. It is reassuring to note that there is a significant amount of tools and guidance already available to parties so that we can implement the GBF without delay. Where tools and guidance are available, we note that often it is not accessible to the parties. We therefore welcome the Secretariat's efforts to address this through raising their profile through the clearinghouse mechanism, including them in capacity building activities, and strengthening relations with IPBES and other relevant organisations. On the 4 recommendations for new work areas, we do recognise that more work is required, but without an assessment of their impact on the workload of the parties and the Secretariat, it is difficult to know how to prioritise them. We would suggest that we include them in square brackets in the substa recommendation, along with a caveat that the whole work programme should be reviewed by SBI and work is prioritised according to the capacity within the Secretariat. With regards to the IPBES work programme, IPBES can only fit one further assessment into its work programme before 2030, so we should prioritise the requests as much as we can. While all of the topics suggested for consideration are clearly important, we would suggest that we focus taking forward the proposals relating to biodiversity and pollution and biodiversity and poverty. Pollution is the one major driver of biodiversity loss that has not been the focus of an IPBES deliverable so far, and it is also an area in which a gap has been identified in the tools and guidance available. We therefore believe it warrants a standalone assessment, though we would suggest leaving the question of whether there should be fast-track assessment to the IPBES plenary, where the procedures and implications are better understood. Meanwhile, greater evidence on maximising synergies between global action on biodiversity and eradicating poverty would directly benefit the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and this could be included within the scope of the second global assessment. We've suggested some minor text amendments, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. The next speaker is Côte d'Ivoire, followed by Somalia.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Côte d'Ivoire backs the position voiced by South Africa on behalf of Africa and welcomes the work which was carried out in preparing this document. Now, the current document lists all of the main technical and scientific needs required for support for the implementation of the framework. And this is something that is very good if we generally want to resolve the problems facing biodiversity in a holistic way, as well as its incidence on the work of the Convention. Madam Chair, a number of the goals, the targets of the framework already indicate what the approach to be followed for implementation is. Truth be told, the tools and guidelines regarding other targets remain to be developed to ensure that they are more relevant, practical, and indeed effective when it comes to implementation. Madam Chair, Côte d'Ivoire, for 3 years now, has had a pilot project for marine spatial planning. And we're aware of all of the difficulties related to human, technological, and financial resource mobilization. For this reason, we welcome the painstaking work which has been undertaken. Madam Chair, the clear gaps and shortcomings which have been identified in the various areas of work are relevant ones, and they're worthy of our attention. However, within this framework, synergies of action between various platforms are pressing. Some concepts which have been raised, such as the bioeconomy, are worthy of a better consideration, better understanding, and indeed better definitions. Madam Chair, The successful implementation of our global framework will involve issues of capacity building, cooperation, technical, scientific, and effective cooperation in all of their facets, are all pressing to be able to solve the problem of the weak capabilities of a number of states and limited sharing of data and experience. By way of conclusion, Madam Chair, Côte d'Ivoire believes that the draft recommendation is a sound basis for our future discussions. I thank you.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. Somalia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us the floor. Somalia is committed to current and future biodiversity priorities, including institutional strengthening and capacity building, such as policy and legislative development, and also NB sub-targets. However, there is a knowledge and data gap to assess the status of biodiversity resources, which make challenge to future decisions on biodiversity conservation in Somalia. In terms of biodiversity and pollution, in Somalia there is a lot of illegal dumping of toxic waste at the sea. Toxic waste containers had been washed up on the coast of Somalia, which threatens the marine life and the health of the community. There is a need of scientific investigations and international enforcement. Also, there is a need to establishment of a country and regional technical institutions to support biodiversity conservation nationally and global efforts in general. We welcome to any support of implementing NBSAP, GBF targets, and other biodiversity plans. We request from the Secretary to consider long-term solutions, including biodiversity resource map and data centers, also to tackle issues related to illegal things which threaten the species, such as the chemical waste dumping and the other mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Somalia. Tanzania, you have the floor, and I would like to remind participants that list is closed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tanzania acknowledged the great initiatives and efforts toward the accomplishment of the GBF targets. Tanzania, like many other countries, still struggles on the issues of data collection and management, especially on biodiversity, agriculture, and agroecology. Tanzania also acknowledged the great potential of data in planning and setting priorities in our countries in line with the GBF targets. In this case, Tanzania stresses the parties to a continued capacity building, integrate information on biodiversity for easy access and use, develop a global biodiversity entity to support biodiversity move, find the easy way for the findings to be implemented in countries since most of the data are global. And finally, we are happy to see the integration of the different tools rather than the tools working in silos. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks to all parties for their interventions. Now we go to the list of major groups. I would like to call microphone for 221. IPLC. Microphone 221.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is made on behalf of the International Forum on Biodiversity, Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, IFB. We welcome the recommendation that equity and the human rights-based approach relating to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity should be included as a new work stream under the Convention, taking in consideration the element of Section C of the GMT+3, the outcomes of the working group on Article 8J and related provisions, and other relevant guidances under the CBD. We note that work related to human rights should align with international standards, including the UNDRIP, ILO Convention number 169, and relevant other instruments. We also support the identification of right-based approaches to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from its utilization, including issues related to gender, as one of the possible topics for further fast-track assessment by IPBS in Chapter 26.3, Add 1. Furthermore, significant gaps relevant to indigenous peoples and local communities have been identified, including on the recognitions of indigenous and traditional territories in Target 3, on collective actions and non-market-based approaches and other elements of Target 19, Section F, on alternative knowledge systems in Target 21, which includes CBMIS, and on element of Target 22. I would like to emphasize that some element of these gaps may be beyond what is addressed in the new program of work on Article 8J, and it is important that these key gaps are not left unattended. SAPSTA will need to address gaps not included in the new program of work, and alignment between SAPSTA and Article 8J recommendations should be sought to avoid duplication. He also notes that in some cases, gaps can be more appropriately addressed by adapting existing guidance documents and the existing program of work. We believe the review of gap assessment should be continuous and that this decision does not preclude developing additional guidance and work streams in the future beyond those mentioned in SAPSTA 26 in 15. I would like to remind parties of the importance of accessibility of guidance produced and strongly encourage multiple language versions, multiple format, and simplified or shortened guidance to support the whole of society approach. Therefore, our specific suggestions are as follows. In the decision text of SAPSTA 26.3, after paragraph 3, we propose to add 3 bis, notes that SAPSTA 26 in 15 also identified gaps in relation to indigenous peoples and local communities that are not addressed in this recommendation and will need to be addressed in the new program of work recommended by a working group on Article 8J and related provisions, including in relation to implementing Section C and targets including 1, 3, 5, 9, 13, 21, and 22. In paragraph 6b, after where needed and including uptaking existing guidance where required, and after to address gaps, add including those, and after guidance are, add both broadly accessible. In decision text of document SAPSTA 26.3, add 1, include in the list paragraph 1, right-based approaches to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the equitable sharing of benefits arising from its utilization, including issues related to gender. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I need to ask parties for their support for this statement. Then I will ask microphone to 257, women.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Fatima Al-Arabi from Morocco. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women's Caucus. As stated in Section C, the GBF is to be understood, acted upon, implemented, reported, and evaluated, consistent with human rights-based approach, and that a successful implementation of the framework will depend on ensuring gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. We appreciate the assessment clearly recognizes the need for further guidance and tools development on the cross-cutting issues, including gender and Target 23. The gender plan of action, and Section C of the framework, HRBA, is critical to achieving transformative action and impact by 2030. The assessment also acknowledges the work being undertaken by agencies and civil society alike to address some of the gaps. We also reiterate that the issue of gender equality and biodiversity needs special attention and dedicated resources, knowledge, and cooperation to build the capacity of government officials and other key stakeholders to integrate gender in biodiversity policy and action and support the implementation of the gender plan of action, including building an intersectionality approach in addressing other identified issues like sustainable use of resources and the bioeconomy. The CBD Women's Caucus urges parties to support the following considerations: underscore the urgency of making these tools, guidance, and resources available to parties and observers with clear timelines for prompt use to support the inclusive and effective implementation of the GBF at national and subnational levels. Make special effort to improve the knowledge management mechanisms, development and availability of tools and guidance. In terms of more inclusion, gender responsiveness, multilingual and culturally appropriate guidance that is based on multiple resources of knowledge. Consider the establishment of a new program of work to address the gender and biodiversity nexus. This is a cross-cutting issue that is increasingly key to effective and successful implementation of the GBF. Consistently include reference to women and youth in the recommendations alongside to indigenous people and local communities. Every time when relevant, when our unique knowledge holders and also suffer from gender differentiated impacts caused by biodiversity loss. Hence, addressing knowledge gaps around gender and biodiversity can indeed enhance implementation and identify appropriate solution. For that, we suggest the following additions to the text. Number 2, decides to advance work in the following areas, including the option to establish new programs of work when and if the urgency, novelty, and relevance of the issues so require. Number 3, encourages parties, other governments, relevant multilateral environmental agreements and other agreements, intergovernmental processes, international organization, initiatives, indigenous people, and local communities, women and youth, and
Women, you need to
stakeholders.
conclude your statement.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there support for May I ask microphone to 705, youth?
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We note the general finding regarding scientific and technical guidance to support the implementation of the GBF. Regarding the findings, first we are concerned regarding the potential new work area proposed referring to the bioeconomy. Although the term bioeconomy may be used to refer to sustainable biodiversity-based activities, products, and services, the bioeconomy is still a disputed concept that is also being used by sectors that are related to intensive land use changes and other drivers of biodiversity loss. Therefore, we express our concern that without a clear definition, the bioeconomy could open up space for businesses to continue to use false solutions and greenwash their strategies, distancing us from the transformative change needed. We therefore recommend that the concept of bioeconomy be precisely defined before including it as a new area of work. Second, we are welcome that equity and human right-based approach to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is recognized as a gap and support that it be included as a new line of work under the convention. We consider that this gap has been well identified in several recent documents such as Substa-26/INF/15 and the work of the Arteга on indicators. We emphasize that equity and human rights are central to Target 3, 13, 16, 22, and 23, and Section C, as well as to the successful implementation of the GBF as a whole. In relation to this, we bring to attention to the need to extend efforts to address the intergenerational equity as a cross-cutting consideration in the implementation of the framework, which in the GBF includes the aspects of ensuring we meet the needs of future generations, as well as ensuring meaningful participation of younger generations in decision-making processes. In this same perspective, we also welcome IPBS collaboration with the CBD and support right-based approaches to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the equitable sharing of the benefits of its use, including gender-related issues as one of the topics for future fast-track assessment by IPBES in Substa 26/3/Ad1. When referring to this proposed topic, we would like to make a text proposal that after the word gender, the words and intergenerational equity be included. We kindly ask the parties to support this intervention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there support for this intervention? I don't see any. If I may ask microphone to 273, CBD Alliance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representing the Pesticide Action Network UK, I issued this statement on behalf of the CBD Alliance. The CBD Alliance appreciates the work of the Secretariat, amended under paragraph 2 of Substa Recommendation 25.3, to review and analyse existing tools and guidance and their gaps to support the implementation of the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Frameworks, as detailed in CBD Substa 26/15. Notwithstanding that many areas of new work relevant to the implementation of the framework have not been included, the CBD Alliance supports the Secretariat's proposals for Substa 26 to adopt a recommendation for the adoption by COPT of a decision authorising the progression of 4 areas of work highlighted in CBD Substa 26.3, including biodiversity inclusive spatial planning relevant for Target 1, pollution and biodiversity relating to Target 7 and others, sustainable biodiversity-based activities, products and services linked to Target 9, and equity in the human rights-based approach relating to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, which is a cross-cutting issue. In particular, the CBD Alliance acknowledges the particular synergies between the implementation of the KMGBF targets 7 and 10 and provisions of the Global Framework on Chemicals, including its targets A7 to phase out highly hazardous pesticides in agriculture, and target D5 to increase government support for agroecology, integrated pest management, and the adoption of non-chemical alternatives in agriculture. We also acknowledge the potential role that CBD collaboration and coordination with the BRS and Minamata conventions can and should play in strengthening national action on highly hazardous chemicals under their mandates and the mandate of the KMGBF. We also highly welcome the recognition of the paramount importance of increasing the integration of equity and human rights-based approaches to conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity to ensure implementation of all KMGBF targets meets the human rights and other provisions in Section C. Finally, we support the scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the KMGBF detailed in the IP-BEST Transformative Change Assessment, including the focus on multifunction landscapes through ecological intensification, detailed in CBD Substa 26.3 Add 1. We encourage parties to Substa to adopt a recommendation in line with that proposed in CBD Substa 26.3 and look forward to working with parties within the Substa, SBI and CBD as a whole in successfully progressing these critical new areas of work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. May I ask for support of parties for this statement? I don't see any. Now we are going to different lists. Each of speakers can speak for 2 minutes. I will ask microphone to 161 EPBS.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to all. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update to Substa on the work of IPBES relevant to Agenda Item 4. At its 10th session in September 2023, the IPBES plenary decided to undertake 3 assessments, all requested by a decision from COP15, a methodological assessment on biodiversity monitoring, a methodological assessment on spatial planning and connectivity, and a second global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services. The plenary also considered at its 12th session, to be held in the end of 2025, the topic for an additional fast-track assessment to start in 2026 and end in 2029. The call for requests, inputs and suggestions for this topic will be launched early 2025, and we understand that the CBD COP intends to adopt a request to IPBES at its 16th meeting. I'm pleased to report that the scoping for the second global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services is advancing well, with a scoping workshop held in April in Monaco. The draft scoping report will be made available for external review on 27th of May. This assessment is expected to provide an update to the first global assessment, but also to have more focus on, among others, pollution, indirect drivers, oceans, and indigenous and local knowledge, and the roles of indigenous peoples and local communities, as requested by many IPBES members. The assessment is expected to be finalized in the end of 2028 and to provide comprehensive information for use by the CBD and the preparation of post-2030 goals and targets. IPBES 11 will be held from 10th to 16th December 2024 in Namibia. At that session, the plenary will consider the assessment of the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food and health, the IPBES Nexus Assessment, and the Transformative Change Assessment. Allow me also to comment on the functions of IPBES other than assessments. Work related under objectives includes the approval of a capacity building rolling work plan. In 2022, IPBES Data Knowledge Management Policy and Nature Futures Framework. Work under these functions implement the work plans approved by the plenary and includes workshops for IPBES national focal points. So in closing, I'd like to recall that IPBES strongly values its collaboration with the CBD and remains committed to provide a strong knowledge base to inform the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you.
We thank for this update to Dr. David Obora, Chair of IPBES. Thank you. We go now to 201, OHCHR.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR. We recommend that Substas 26 should propose rights-based approaches to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the equitable sharing of benefits from its utilization, including issues related to gender as currently proposed in paragraph 29D of the recommendation of document Substa 26/03 Ed 1 concerning IBES. Similarly, Substa 26 should propose equity and the human rights-based approach relating to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity as an issue on which...
May I ask you to...
Sorry, apologies. Equity and the human rights-based approach relating to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity as an issue on which new work under the Convention may be advanced, as currently included in paragraph 3, letter D of document Substa 26/03. Biodiversity loss disproportionately impacts those who depend directly on nature for their livelihoods and culture, and those who are already in vulnerable situations. Addressing the current biodiversity crisis requires transformative change that acknowledges the profound interrelationship between humans and nature. And biodiversity action needs to address biodiversity loss without exacerbating existing inequalities or structural causes leading to vulnerability. It needs to follow a human rights-based approach, respecting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights, including the right to a healthy environment and indigenous peoples' rights, as set out in Section C of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and in international human rights law. Despite their transformative potential, rights-based approaches to conservation...
Please slow down or interpretation will cease.
IBES fast-track assessment and further work under the Convention on this topic could help to close this key knowledge gap, advancing transformative change for people and the planet. Substa 26 should therefore propose rights-based approaches as a topic for fast-track assessment by IBES and for new work under the Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there support from parties for the statement? May I ask microphone to 157 FAO?
Thank you, Madam Chair. FAO thanks the Secretariat for making reference to the FAO Biodiversity Knowledge Hub as an example of a platform to enhance the accessibility of key tools and guidance to reach a broader audience. The pilot stage of the Biodiversity Knowledge Hub was launched to support country efforts to implement the framework through policy and technical tools, including standards, guidelines, accounting and monitoring tools, code of conduct, and other normative instruments developed in most of the cases with direct intergovernmental guidance. The Hub is a user-friendly platform that facilitate access to more than 350 tools and instruments that are relevant to targets of the framework. With the help from parties, FAO would like to further develop the FAO Biodiversity Knowledge Hub. Next step will include consultation with users and stakeholders, translation of the interface into UN languages, improve the scope of regional and national resources, including data and good practices, determining gaps to further guide the development of knowledge resources, and ensure interoperability with other systems. FAO invites parties, all stakeholders and actors to make use of these existing tools and the compendium of guidelines, policy and other resources under FAO's tools belt. Time is short and our focus must remain on using the platforms, tools and mechanisms we have in place to scale up and accelerate action. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, FAO. Is there support for statement? Yes, thank you. Finally, I will ask microphone to 197, Medpan.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is delivered on behalf of the Mediterranean Network of Marine Protected Areas Managers, MEDPAN. As mentioned by the document CBD Substa 26 EM 15, paragraph 26, there is a need to refine or update the scientific and technical guidance on other effective area-based conservation measures. MEDPAN acknowledges and commends the work of review and analysis undertaken under the Convention, and MEDPAN will also suggest to update existing guidance on other terms in Target 3, particularly on effectively conserved and managed, on ecologically representative, on well-connected, and equitable governance. Protected areas are a pillar of the work of the Convention since its inception, and numerous guidance and tools have been elaborated. However, taking into account the best science and existing experience, most of them will deserve to be updated and completed, particularly on the connectivity and the role of networks. So MEDPAN stands ready to share its guidance and tools to support this effort, particularly on governance and networks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Parties? Thank you. Dear delegates, thank you for your very useful interventions. I see that we have a lot of common understanding on the draft recommendations. I will prepare conference room paper with the help of Secretariat. I would like to remind you to upload your written statements as soon as possible and no later than 1 hour after close of this session. Thank you very much. I will now hand over the chairing of SABSTA for item 5 to my colleague on the Bureau, Mr. Jan Plesnik. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon, probably late afternoon or early evening. I invite you to kindly take your seats because we are starting in a moment with the agenda item 5, synthetic biology. Because time is our most important and most valuable capital, we are going now to deal with the agenda item synthetic biology, and it is my very great pleasure to be chairing this plenary session for our consideration of just mentioned item. You heard about the work of the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology at the information workshop held on 11th May. I would like to take the opportunity and thank the co-chairs and members of the expert group for their hard work and dedication. Also, allow me to express our thanks to the SABSTA chair and for our very effective secretariat. Now, please take a seat because time is running and water is rising. I would like to invite the secretariat to introduce the documents for this item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For this item, the Secretariat has prepared pre-sessional document 26/4. This document provides information on the process and outcomes of the broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment, capacity building, technology transfer, and knowledge sharing in light of the outcomes of the process, review of the process, and potential options for recommendations for consideration by this subsidiary body. In addition, the subsidiary body also has before it Information Document 4, which contains the compiled, organized, and synthesized information related to the 12 additional trends and issues in synthetic biology. Document 5, which contains the literature review updated in response to the peer review. And Document 6, which contains a compilation of the peer review comments received regarding the outcomes and operation of the horizon scanning process to support deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, the Secretariat, for your brief but highly informative introduction to the document. And before I open the floor for your comments, I would like to remind delegates that the subsidiary body was requested in decision 15/31 to consider the outcomes of the horizon scanning process and make recommendation to the conference of the parties as appropriate the conference of the parties serving as the meeting of the protocol. The subsidiary body was also requested to consider the report on effectiveness on the horizon scanning process and to make a recommendation on the need to extend that process. In light of this, the pre-sessional document contains a series of recommendations proposed by the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group on synthetic biology as potential option for consideration by this distinguished body. These are provided in Annex 5 to the document 26/4. Further, the review of the effectiveness of the process is contained in Annex 3 of document 26/4 and information document 6. I invite all of you to be as concise and as possible in your intervention. Please let us remind what is behind the abbreviation of this distinguished body and also concentrate more on scientific, technical, and technological issues. And I will be limiting intervention to 5 minutes for parties speaking on behalf of region, 3 minutes for individual parties, and 4 minutes for the major stakeholder groups, and as previously 2 minutes for other observers. So now I would like really remind us that following intervention by observers, I will give a brief chance for parties that may wish to comment or support any specific proposal made by this organization. And please, again, focus on the essential points and submitting the full text of your intervention to the Secretariat no later than 1 hour after the close of the session will be very much appreciated, really, to make the life of Secretariat more easy. Please note, however, that your key points, especially those that you would like to have reflected in the draft recommendation, should be read out just in the room. And I will now open the floor for intervention on agenda item 5, synthetic biology. Okay, we have got a list of parties asking for the floor, and I would like to ask the colleagues from Egypt, please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, esteemed delegate, on behalf of the Africa Group, Egypt is honored to address the 26th meeting of the SABSTA on Agenda Item 5. Synthetic biology, with its promises of innovation and its potential implication for biodiversity and human well-being, demands our careful attention and proactive engagement. And the Africa Group reaffirms the need to take a precautionary approach in this regard. As we navigate this complex landscape, the Africa Group emphasizes the critical importance of continuing the process of broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment, ensuring that we remain vigilant in understanding the evolving risks and opportunities associated with synthetic biology vis-à-vis the three objectives of the Convention. Africa stresses the importance of capacity building, appropriate technology transfer, knowledge sharing, and cooperation to ensure that all countries, regardless of their level of development, have the knowledge and resources to meaningfully participate in and benefit from the opportunity presented by synthetic biology, while also protecting their biodiversity and mitigating potential risk. Moreover, as we embark on discussions surrounding synthetic biology, we must not overlook the ethical dimension inherent in this field. Africa supports the extension of the mandate of the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group to support the process of the broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment, recognizing its role in providing scientific guidance and facilitating informed decision-making within this field. Africa re-emphasizes the need for a balanced regional representation and broad experience, participation of indigenous people and local communities, and gender equity. In closing, let us approach this dialogue with a spirit of collaboration and mutual understanding, recognizing the shared responsibility we bear in shaping the future of our planning for betterment of all. Together, let us strive to forge a path that promotes innovation, safeguard biodiversity, and uphold the values of equity, ethics, and sustainability. Finally, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to the Secretariat of the CBD for their tireless effort in producing the comprehensive document that serves as the foundation of our discussion today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Egypt. And the next speaker on my list is Belgium, followed by Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us the floor. On Agenda Item 5, Synthetic Biology, Belgium welcomes the outcome of the broad horizon scanning process as executed by the MARTEC, and we therefore welcome the annexes in CBD/Substa/26/4 and do not feel it is appropriate to review these during Substa. We call on parties to strengthen their efforts to address the needs identified by some parties by implementing the options for capacity building, knowledge sharing, and technology transfer in the context of synthetic biology and its assessment. We welcome document Substa 26-INF6 containing the outcome of the peer review of Annex 1 and 4 and suggest that the MARTEC considers the outcome of its work, in particular to further refine the methodology for a broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment. We agree to continue the process of the broad and regular horizon scanning, monitoring, and assessment, in particular through the literature review, and including to continue to work on the 5 priority trends and issues selected for a deeper assessment identified by the MARTEC and following the refined methodology laid out in Annex 4 of Substa 26/4. We support the MARTEC to continue in-depth assessment on potential impacts of, first, artificial intelligence and machine learning in synthetic biology, second, self-spreading vaccines for wildlife, and third, engineered gene drives to control vector-borne diseases and invasive species on the objectives of the Convention, while avoiding duplication of work performed by the RTEC on risk assessment and risk management on the latter topic of engineered gene drives. As to the topic of self-limiting insects obtained by using synthetic biology, we support to consider these as a potential topic for the further development of guidance on risk assessment under the Cartagena Protocol in line with Annex 1 of Cartagena Protocol Decision 9/13 over the course of the intersessional period ahead of COP/MOP 12. We do believe that the wording needs to be consistent with the recommendation under Agenda Item 6 on risk assessment and risk management. We further agree to extend the MARTEC for the next intersessional period and propose to revise its terms of reference in light of the report of the effectiveness prepared by the CBD Secretariat according to paragraph 11 of CBD Decision 15/31. We call on parties to contribute to strengthen the multidisciplinary approach by considering nominating experts with diverse backgrounds for the MARTEC, including considering multiple knowledge systems and types of values, in order to ensure the ability to evaluate potential impacts of synthetic biology on the objectives of the Convention, with a special view to socio-economic, cultural, ethical, and conceptual aspects of biodiversity conservation. We will hand in our suggestions for recommendations to the CBD COP and the Cartagena Protocol COP/MOP in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium, for your statement. And now I would like to pass the floor to Mexico, followed by Argentina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. My delegation recognizes the analysis work that's been carried out by the evaluation process by the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical experts group, and we take note of it and of the scientific needs for capacity building, technology transfer, exchange of knowledge indicated in Annex 2, reiterating the special concern to make sure that resources for biodiversity and traditional knowledge are also included. We support the methodology being perfected through the process of analysis that's due to be amplified and carried out regularly, which figures in Annex 4 in accordance with Decision 1521, and that this should be in 1531, and for this to be improved if necessary. We recognize the importance of always putting in practice the precautionary principle and human rights with technological options which favor human health, environmental protection, and which are culturally adapted, such as agroecology and the integrated focuses on medicine favoring indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as the incorporation of considerations of a socio-economic nature of the impacts of biotechnology. And finally, we would like to emphasize the importance of making progress in our work in terms of the distribution of benefits based on the use of digital information, genetic information, and the results of this should be considered in the prospective analysis process and in the evaluation process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mexico. And now we would like to hear from Argentina, followed by Australia.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, delegates, Argentina is grateful for the efforts made on synthetic biology under the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're grateful for the efforts of the MARTEC and the Secretariat. However, it is our responsibility to point out that the current horizon scanning process leaves us with more questions than answers. It is clear that this process, in its current form, is exhausted. For Argentina, there are numerous signs that point to this conclusion, such as the lack of conclusive results that we can transform into direct action, the duplication with other processes within the CBD itself and across other international institutions, the difficulty of involving developing countries, and the very few responses from the Global South to the notifications on the subject. Dear delegates, in the face of this evidence, we must ask ourselves whether it's possible to continue this process while remaining faithful to the principles of our convention. There are many doubts as to how the horizon scanning process has contributed to the objectives of the CBD, or indeed the goals of the global framework. For this reason, Argentina believes that if the discussion on synthetic biology is to continue, it's essential to reorient our focus towards capacity building and equity. Developing countries should not be mere spectators in the synthetic biology arena. They must be major players, equipped and empowered. All parties should be able to reap the benefits of these technologies, which hold great potential for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Therefore, Argentina believes that it may be time to create a new framework. We propose that the COP request the Secretariat to develop a robust draft action plan to promote the benefits of synthetic biology in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. This plan should promote capacity building for research and development in all parties, but particularly in developing countries, in line with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and Articles 16 and 19 of the CBD. Argentina will participate constructively in further discussions of this agenda item. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Argentina. And the next speaker will be Australia, followed by Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Australia notes the results and recommendations of the horizon scanning, monitoring and assessment conducted by the multidisciplinary ad hoc technical expert group, LAMATEG, on synthetic biology, and the needs for capacity building, technology transfer and knowledge sharing identified by the group. Australia appreciates the need to understand how technology may help us in our endeavour to protect, conserve and repair biodiversity. However, Australia recognises that synthetic biology has not been agreed as a permanent thematic item under the Convention, and that the purpose of the horizon scanning process was to assess and identify positive and negative technological applications of biotechnology associated with the concept of synthetic biology. As such, Australia does not consider some of the proposals made by the multidisciplinary ARTEG, such as policy formulation or white papers on specific applications of synthetic biology included in the MARTEG's report, to be within the scope of what was expected to result from Decision 15/31. Any proposed work on synthetic biology needs to clearly align with the overarching objectives of the Convention, and in particular the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. As identified in the MARTEG's report, many of the analysed applications of synthetic biology are in theoretical stages, some decades off becoming feasible, and may benefit from further investigation by other fora more befitted to the technical and scientific expertise needed to undertake such analysis. We would see draft recommendations for this item consider three main issues. First, to confirm the COP at its 16th meeting agrees that synthetic biology continue as a thematic program of work for the CBD in the intersessional period to COP17, and therefore requires the continuation of the MARTEG or an alternative advisory group. Second, if this group or similar is agreed to be continued, to reconsider its formulation of members and develop specific and clear terms of reference for this group that conducts horizon scanning that is within the mandate and the objectives of the Convention. And thirdly, reconsider the need to conduct horizon scanning exercise each COP cycle, perhaps extending the timeframes for scanning to occur every 4 years. In an already resource-constrained environment, we believe it is important that work undertaken under the CBD remains focused to the Convention's goals and purpose, without adding unnecessarily to an already demanding work program. Our SBSTA agenda is ever growing, and we need to prioritise work that is in the remit and the scope of the Convention and its global biodiversity framework in order to meet our goals, some of which are already fast approaching the timeline for achievement. Australia would not like to see resources diverted from goals and targets that need our attention now. Australia looks forward to updated draft recommendations to consider during this meeting and working with parties to find a way forward on this topic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Australia, for your statement. And I would like to announce that we should close speaking list for tonight. And now I would like to pass the floor to Japan. And after Japan, the next speaker will be Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan would like to appreciate the efforts of the Secretariat and welcomes the results of the horizon scanning, which was conducted on a tentative basis. Although Japan recognizes the usefulness of the results of the horizon scanning, we would like to repeat our concerns regarding synthetic biology, that there has been no consensus on the definition of the term, as well as whether synthetic biology constitutes a new and emerging issue. Without such basic understanding and consensus, Japan considers that it would not be appropriate to conduct further specific studies before concluding such discussions and proceed based on the results of the horizon scanning, which was conducted on a temporary basis. In this regard, we believe we should take a cautious approach and make careful considerations before conducting a permanent process, such as regular horizon scanning, as well as any specific studies based solely on the results of this tentative horizon scanning before the definition of synthetic biology is agreed. In this context, Japan has some difficulties with the descriptions found in the paragraph 22 C, D, and C, E of the document SBSTA 26/4, in particular, the finalization of the horizon scanning, and would like to suggest that further examinations, including the definitions, should be necessary before the finalization. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Japan, for your opinion. And now Colombia will have the privilege to be the last speaker on this topic tonight, because social aspects are as the same importance as the agenda. So please, Colombia, go ahead.
Gracias, señor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Colombia thanks the Secretariat for the presentation of document SBSTA 26/4 on synthetic biology. Our country reaffirms that it is on a technical, scientific, and technological basis that we will be able to reach solid recommendations as a contribution to the COP16 to be held in Cali, Colombia in October. Colombia recognizes the benefits that the products of synthetic biology can bring to achieve sustainable development supported by science and technology, and considers that the adoption and recommendations in this regard should be made responsibly, considering elements of risk assessment and management associated with biodiversity, as well as its monitoring. We welcome the results obtained by the ad hoc multidisciplinary group of technical experts, which, as mandated by Decision 1531, carried out a process of comprehensive and periodic prospective analysis, follow-up, and evaluation of the progress made in this area, with a view to establishing the potential of positive and negative impacts on the achievement of the 3 objectives of the Convention. In this regard, Colombia considers the proposed methodology to be relevant, laying the groundwork for carrying out related exercises and also considering the optimization of future processes. Finally, Columbia wishes to highlight the work carried out by the multidisciplinary group of experts with respect to the identification of needs in capacity building, information exchange, and technology transfer, given the importance of these aspects in reducing the inequality gap that exists between the participation of developed and developing countries in the implementation and development of synthetic biology. Thank you very much.
Columbia, and also special thanks for hosting the next COP. I guess now we will finish with the speakers tonight, and don't worry, we are going to continue tomorrow morning, and allow me to express deep thanks for all speakers at this moment, and I will now pass the floor to the Secretariat for some housekeeping issues.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to remind all the delegates to come to Index Finger Garden for your reception, and it is located at the main entrance. We look forward to see all of you there. Thank you.
Yeah. Excuse me, because I'm a really old man, so I would like to remind regions to provide names for pending bureau members' nomination by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Very important issue, and enjoy your reception and have a nice evening.